They laughed the moment she stepped on stage, just a shy girl with a trembling voice and a worn-out notebook. But no one knew that inside those pages was a story powerful enough to silence a room and change everything. A journey of courage, creativity, and reclaiming a voice the world once tried to erase. She didn't just perform a play, she transformed a town. Get ready. This one will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from. They mocked her silence until they heard her speak. The sound of laughter is a curious. In the right context, it warms like summer rain. In the wrong one, it cuts deeper than any blade. For Ilara Novak, 16 and trembling under harsh stage light, laughter was the sound of her world collapsing. Her hands clutched a worn notebook, its edges softened by years of touch, its pages filled with words no one had ever heard. Until now. One mispronounced word, just one, and the auditorium erupted. Ilara stood frozen, the spotlight exposing every crack in her confidence, every tremor in her slender frame. The teacher's sympathetic smile somehow made it worse. Thank you, Ilara. That will be sufficient. She descended the stairs without raising her eyes, her dark hair falling forward like a curtain. The wooden steps creaked beneath her worn sneakers, each sound marking another moment in her endless walk back to her. No one noticed how her fingers traced the spine of her notebook, how she pressed it against her chest like armor. No one knew what those pages really held. No one imagined the girl they mocked was about to change everything. Miramar Bay wasn't a place that welcomed change. Nestled between rocky cliffs and the restless sea, the coastal town wore its heritage like a second skin. Old families occupied old houses. Old traditions dictated who spoke and who remained silent. For generations, social hierarchies had been as immovable as the lighthouse that stood sentinel over the harbor, sturdy, unflinching, casting judgment with its sweeping gaze. Ilara lived with her grandmother, Nonna Sofia, in a modest blue house perched on the eastern hill. From her bedroom window, she could see the whole town spread below, the marina with its bobbing boats, the town square with its ancient oak, and the sprawling campus of Miramar Academy, where her daily torments played out in excruciating detail. Their home smelled of lavender and fresh bread, of old books and sea salt. Every surface told a story. Embroidered tablecloths depicting coastal legends, hand-carved figurines of forgotten heroes, photographs of women with Ilara's same dark eyes and guarded smile. These were her people, quiet creators who spoke through their hands when words failed. Them. Nonna, why do we keep trying? Ilara asked that evening, curled on the window seat as her grandmother's knitting needles clicked a steady rhythm. Outside, fog rolled in softening the edges of the world. No one at school cares about any of this. She gestured to the room, to the hand-woven tapestries, to the jars of preserved family recipes, to the cultural touchstones that felt increasingly irrelevant in a world that valued designer labels and viral videos. Sophia's hands stilled. At 72, her fingers remained graceful despite arthritis that swelled her knuckles. Because forgetting is easier than remembering, Minha querida, and what is easy is rarely what matters. The next morning, rain pelted the windows of Miramar Academy as Mrs. Winters announced the semester project. You'll be working in groups of 3 to analyze and reimagine a classic work of literature through a contemporary lens. Ilara's stomach tightened. Group projects meant exposure, judgment, inevitable disappointment. She stared at her desk, tracing the wood grain with her fingernail, silently willing her name to be paired with anyone but Ilara Novak. You'll be working with Chloe Winters, Julian Reyes. The universe had a cruel... Chloe Winters, daughter of the literature, queen of the social hierarchy, collector of insecurities, smiled with practiced politeness that never reached her eyes. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, her uniform always impeccably tailored. 3 years ago, she had found Ilara's poetry journal in the library and read passages aloud to a circle of laughing friends. Such deep thoughts from the weird, quiet girl. She had mocked, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Julian Reyes sat 2 rows behind Chloe, all sharp angles and calculated disinterest. Where Chloe's cruelty was overt, Julian's was precise, cutting remarks delivered with such dry wit that even teachers sometimes failed to recognize the barbs. His family owned half the businesses in town. His opinions shaped reputations. His silence could be punishment. Ilara had been on the receiving end of both. "We'll meet at my house," Chloe announced after class, not bothering to consult either of them. "Friday, 4 o'clock. Don't be late." Julian nodded once, already scrolling through his phone. Ilara managed a whispered "okay" before gathering her things, textbooks, pencil case, and the notebook she never left behind. It was held together with duct tape now, silver strips creating a patchwork across the worn blue cover. Inside those pages lived all the words she couldn't speak. Aloud, observations, poems, character sketches, fragments of plays, stories no one would ever hear. Friday arrived with brutal speed. Elara stood before the Winters mansion, a sprawling Victorian that loomed against the grey sky like something from another century. Wind chimes sang from the wraparound porch. Wind rustled through carefully manicured topiaries. Everything about the property announced wealth and taste, and made Elara acutely aware of her second-hand clothes. Chloe answered the door with a phone pressed to her ear. "Just come in," walking away without waiting. "We're in the sunroom." Elara followed hesitant, taking in crystal chandeliers and original artwork. The sunroom overlooked a sloping garden that led to the sea. Floor-to-ceiling windows captured the view in dramatic frames. Julian was already there, sprawled in an armchair, a leather-bound copy of The Tempest open on his lap. "Shakespeare," he said by way of greeting. "Mrs. Winters thinks we should do The Tempest, something about storms and isolation being universal themes." "It's perfect," Chloe added, finally ending her call. "Daddy has connections at the regional showcase. If we do well with this project, we could actually get it performed." Elara sat on her notebook clutched in her fingers traced in the duct tape, finding comfort in the familiar text. "I've read it. Last summer." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Great. You can take notes while Julian and I brainstorm the creative direction." For the next hour, Elara said little. She wrote diligently as the others discussed modernizing the setting, altering character motivations, incorporating contemporary issues. Occasionally, she nodded or shook her head. Once, she ventured a suggestion about Prospero's forgiveness speech, but Chloe talked over her. Julian watched. She felt his eyes tracking her movements, studying the way she retreated further into herself with each When Chloe left to take another call, he leaned forward. "You actually have thoughts about this, don't you?" His voice held none of its usual mockery. "You're just not saying them." Elara looked up, startled by the direct address. I've always liked that. The idea of being shipwrecked with your memories, having to decide which ones to keep." Something shifted in Julian's expression. A flicker of genuine interest, quickly masked by his usual indifference. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by Chloe's return. "Mom needs me for something. We'll continue next week," she announced. "Same time, same place. Maybe by then, we'll have actual progress." They gathered their things in awkward silence. Elara tucked her notebook into her backpack, not noticing when a loose page fluttered to the floor. She hurried out, eager to escape the weight of their combined attention. Julian noticed the fallen page after she left. He picked it up, intending to call after her, but his eyes caught on the words. It wasn't notes from their meeting. It was poetry, raw, lyrical, devastating. A verse about a girl who lived inside glass walls, seen but never heard, her voice distorted by the transparency that was supposed to reveal her. He folded the page carefully and slipped it into his pocket. He said nothing, but something shifted. The following Monday, Elara arrived at school to find Julian leaning against her locker. His posture suggested casual indifference, but his eyes were "You dropped this." Elara's heart stumbled. She recognized it immediately. A poem she'd written during a particularly dark week last semester. "Did you read it?" "Yes." No apology, just honesty. "You're good. Really good." She took the page with trembling fingers. "Please don't tell anyone that you can write. Why would that be a secret?" There was genuine... Because she struggled to articulate the fear that had defined her. "Last time someone found my writing, they used it against me." Julian's expression darkened. "Chloe." It wasn't a question. Elara nodded anyway. "What if someone read your work who actually understood it?" he asked. The question hung between them, fragile and unexpected. Before she could answer, the first bell rang. Students flooded the hallway, breaking the moment. Julian straightened, his public persona sliding back into place like a... "See you Friday, Novak," he said, walking away with his usual confident stride. But something had changed. As October stretched into November, subtle shifts occurred. During their Friday meetings, Julian began directing questions to Elara, creating space for her responses. When Chloe interrupted, he would circle back, asking, "What were you saying, Elara?" She began opening up, cautiously. When they discussed modernizing Ariel's character, she showed them sketches she'd made in her notebook, gossamer-like costume designs that blended traditional elements with contemporary silhouettes. "You designed these?" Chloe asked, surprise temporarily overwhelming her dismissiveness. Elara nodded. I helped my grandmother with costumes she used to design for the community theatre. Used to? Julian inquired. Before the new director took over, he preferred ordering costumes from catalogue. Elara's voice held a hint of bitterness. Said handmade looked provincial. As they worked, Julian noticed other things about her. The way she hummed melodies under her breath. Not pop songs, but haunting folk hymns with complex minor progressions. The way she always paused at the mural of a long-forgotten play near the school garden, her fingers hovering just above the painted surface as if she could absorb it through proximity. One afternoon in late November, Mrs. Winters fell ill. A substitute teacher, Mr. Chen, took over the literature class. He was young, enthusiastic, and unfamiliar with the social dynamics of Miramar Academy. When he found an anonymous play submission in the department's submission box, left there by a student who never is to be found, he read excerpts aloud. Listen to this dialogue, excitement evident. The sea doesn't forget what the shore tries to bury. Every tide brings back what we thought was lost. Shells, driftwood, memories thought we'd outgrow. That's the thing about running from. Eventually, the tide. The class fell silent. The writing was striking, emotional, unlike anything they had heard from their peers. Elara sank lower in her seat, her face burning. Those were her words, from a play she'd been writing in secret, inspired by their work on The Tempest. She'd left it in the submission box during a moment of courage, then immediately regretted it. This is remarkable work, Mr. Chen continued. With the author's permission, I'd like to submit it to the regional showcase. Panic flooded Elara's system. Exposure was exactly what she feared, but before she could process this new threat, Julian's voice cut through her anxiety. The author might prefer to remain anonymous, he suggested. Some writers do. Mr. Chen considered this. That's certainly possible. Well, whoever wrote this can speak with me privately if they wish. Otherwise, I'll submit it as an anonymous work from Miramar Academy. After class, Julian caught up with Elara in, It's yours, isn't it? She couldn't speak, could only manage a small nod. Are you going to tell him? I can't. Everyone would know. They'd all be watching, waiting for me to fail. What if you didn't fail? If they loved it? That's not how my story goes. She clutched her notebook tighter. People like me don't get standing ovations. People like you? His voice held an air. You mean talented people? Before she could respond, Chloe approached, her smile tight. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Did you hear? Mr. Chen is submitting an anonymous play to the showcase, the same one we're supposed to be part of with our Tempest project. I heard, Julian said. It's ridiculous. Some amateur thinks they can just swoop in and take our spotlight? Chloe's indignation was palpable. Daddy's already talking to the board about it. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. What do you mean? On the selection, we'll make sure our project gets prize. Chloe flipped her hair over so cowardly. That evening, Elara sat at her grandmother's kitchen table, watching Sophia roll out dough for traditional pastries. The rhythmic motion of her hands was hypnotic, pressing, folding, turning with practiced precision. Nonna, if you could go back to designing costumes, would you? Elara asked. Sophia's hands stilled. The theatre has changed. They want new things now. But your work was beautiful. Everyone says so. Beautiful, yes, but beauty isn't always what people value. Sophia resumed her work, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes we create not for applause, but because the creating itself saves us. Elara considered this. What if someone wanted to hear your stories again? See your work? Then I would remember why I started in the first place. The lines are not for them, for this. She placed a hand. The conversation lingered with Elara through the night and into the following days. As December arrived, bringing colder winds and holiday preparations, a new development shook the quiet rhythm of her life. Mr. Chen announced that the anonymous play, titled Tides of Memory, had been selected as one of 5 finalists for the regional showcase. The school administration was ecstatic. Miramar Academy hadn't been represented at the showcase in over a decade. The selection committee was particularly impressed by the play's fusion of contemporary themes with cultural folklore, Mr. Chen explained. They've requested we perform an excerpt at the winter. A wave of excited chatter swept through the classroom. Who had written it? Who would perform it? What did this mean for their school's reputation? Elara sat very still, her breath shallow. This wasn't supposed to happen. Her words were never meant to be spoken aloud, especially not by strangers who wouldn't understand the weight behind them. After school, she found Julian waiting by her locker again. Congratulations. It's a disaster, she countered, glancing around to ensure no one could overhear. They're going to ruin it. How do you know? Because they don't understand where it comes from. She struggled to explain. Those stories, those traditions, they're not just words on a page. They're my grandmother's voice, her mother's voice, generations of women who never had the luxury of being loud. Julian considered this. Then make sure they get it right. How? I can't just step forward now. No, but you could help from the shadows. The idea took root. Mr. Chen had selected 3 seniors to perform the excerpt, including Chloe, who had lobbied aggressively for the lead role despite having shown nothing but disdain for the anonymous playwright. During the first rehearsal, Elara slipped into the back of the auditorium. From the darkness of the last row, she watched as her words were stripped of their meaning, delivered with artificial emotion and exaggerated gestures. No, 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 the drama teacher, Ms. Reynolds, interrupted. This isn't a soap opera. These lines need authenticity. Chloe sighed dramatically. It's hard to find authenticity in such folksy dialogue. Can't we update it a little? Something broke inside Elara. Before she could stop herself, she was on her feet. It doesn't need updating, she called out. It needs understanding. All heads turned. Ms. Reynolds squinted into the darkness. Who's there? Elara stepped forward, her heart hammering. I just meant, those words come from a specific tradition. They're not meant to be delivered like standard English dialogue. And you know this how? Chloe challenged. I study folklore. Those patterns, those rhythms, they're from oral storytelling tradition. They're meant to be almost sung, not just spoken. Ms. Reynolds considered her. Show us. Panic seized Elara's throat. But then she thought of her grandmother's hands, working dough, creating beauty not for applause, but because the creating itself was salvation. She approached the stage slowly, accepted the script with trembling hands, like this, and began to read. Her voice was fragile at first, barely audible, but as the words, her word, flowed through her, something shifted. The fragility gave way to a clear melodic cadence that filled the auditorium. She didn't just read the lines, she lived them, her body swaying slightly with the natural rhythm of the prose, her accent embracing the cultural that had shaped the text. When she finished, silence hung in the air. Not the cruel silence of mockery, but the stunned silence of revelation. Ms. Reynolds was the first to speak. That was extraordinary. Who are you? Elara Novak. I'm in Mrs. Winter's literature class. Recognition dawned on the quiet one. Julian Reyes and Chloe are in your project group, aren't they? Elara nodded, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Well, Elara, would you consider coaching our actors? Help them capture that quality you just demonstrated? It was a small opening, a chance to protect her words without exposing herself completely. Yes, she said. I can do that. In the days that followed, Elara worked with the cast after school. She taught them the rhythms of her grandmother's dialect, showed them how certain phrases connected to specific gestures, explained the cultural context behind metaphors that had seemed strange to them. Julian often stayed to watch these, his presence a silent support. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the auditorium, and a wordless understanding would pass between them. He knew her secret, and he was guarding it with her. One afternoon, Chloe arrived at rehearsal, visibly excited. You won't believe what I found, she announced, pulling out her phone. There's this old costume room near the back of the auditorium. It's like a time capsule of awful fashion. She played a video she'd recorded earlier, a mocking tour of a dusty storage room filled with handmade costumes from productions long past. Her commentary was scathing. Look at these tacky sequins. And this headdress. Was it made from a mop? Laughter rippled through, but Elara froze. She recognized the intricate beadwork, the hand-dyed fabrics, the detailed embroidery. They were her grandmother's, preserved but forgotten, now being ridiculed who couldn't see their value. One costume in particular caught her attention, a sea spirit costume from an adaptation of a local legend, its delicate layers designed to move like waves. Sophia had spent months on that piece, incorporating traditional patterns that told the story within the garment itself. That's not tacky, Elara said, her voice soft but firm. That's traditional coastal craftsmanship. The person who made it was an artist. Chloe rolled her eyes. If you say so, but we're definitely not using any of that junk for the showcase. That night, after her grandmother had gone to bed, Elara slipped back to the school. The security guard knew her. She often stayed late to study in the library and waved her through with a smile. The costume room was exactly as Chloe's video had shown. Dusty, forgotten, filled with the ghosts of past performances. Elara found the sea spirit costume, now crumpled in a corner where Chloe had carelessly tossed it. She lifted it gently, her fingers tracing the patterns her grandmother had so lovingly created. It was damaged, threads pulled, beadwork broken, colors dulled by years of neglect, but the bones of it remained beautiful. Ilara made a decision. She would restore it night by night, hand-stitching memories into every fold, breathing life into forgotten art. Not for recognition, but because these traditions deserved to be preserved. Because beauty, even unrecognized, mattered. She began that very night, using supplies from her grandmother's sewing kit. Her fingers worked with a precision that surprised even her. Muscle memory from years of watching Sophia, perhaps, or simply the focus that comes with honoring something precious. The winter assembly approached rapidly. As Ilara divided her time between coaching the actors and secretly restoring the costume, a new complication arose. During a crucial rehearsal, the lead actress, senior named Melody, broke down in frustration. "Can't do it," tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand this character. I don't feel what she's feeling." Ms. Reynolds looked desperate. They were 3 days from performance. "Ilara, you seem to have a connection to this material. Could you read the part? Just to show Melody the emotional tenor we're aiming for?" Reluctantly, Ilara agreed. She took the script, closed her eyes briefly, and began. Her voice filled the auditorium, fragile at first, then strong, aching, whole. The words flowed through her, not as text, but as lived experience. She wasn't performing. She was remembering, her body instinctively finding the physical language that accompanied the dialogue. When she finished, no one spoke. Ms. Reynolds stared at her with an expression of dawning realization. "Ilara," she said slowly, "I need you to take over this role." "What?" Ilara and Chloe spoke simultaneously, one in horror, one in outrage. "Ms. Reynolds, I've been working on this for weeks," Chloe protested. "You can't just replace me with her." "I'm not replacing anyone," the teacher clarified. "Melody has the lead. You have an important supporting role. But I'm asking Ilara to step in as co-director and to take the narrator role we haven't been able to cast." It was a compromise, one that would put Ilara on stage but wouldn't expose her as the playwright. She agreed, but only under one condition. "I want to use the original costumes from the storage room, restored." Ms. Reynolds hesitated. "Those old things, are they even wearable?" "They will be," Ilara promised, "and they tell the story in ways modern costumes can't." The teacher considered, then nodded. "If you can make them performance-ready, yes." For the next 3 days, Ilara barely slept. She divided her time between rehearsals, restoration work, and her regular classes. Julian noticed her exhaustion and began bringing her coffee during their project meet, silently supporting her double life. One evening, he found her in the costume room, carefully reattaching tiny sea spirit costumes. "You're killing yourself for this," setting a paper cup beside. "Why not just tell everyone you wrote it?" Ilara didn't look up from her work. "Because then it becomes about me, not the story. And if the story succeeds, what then?" She finally raised her eyes to his. "Then maybe I tell the truth. But first, I need to know they hear the words, not just the girl who's always been too afraid to speak them." Julian sat beside her, picking up a needle and thread. "Show me how to." Together, they worked through the evening, restoring beauty that had been forgotten, giving new life to old traditions. It was the first time Ilara had shared this part of herself with anyone outside her family. The intimacy of it, the shared purpose, the quiet understanding, created a bond that transcended their previous roles. The night before the assembly, Ilara brought the restored costumes to Ms. Reynolds. The teacher's eyes widened as she examined the intricate work. "These are extraordinary," she admitted. "Who made the originals?" "My grandmother," Ilara said. "Sophia Novak. She was the costume almost 20 years." Recognition dawned on Ms. Reynolds' face. "Sophia? I remember her work from when I was a student, but she disappeared from the theater scene so suddenly." "She didn't disappear. She was pushed aside when the new director decided traditional designs were outdated." The teacher touched the sea spirit costume gently. "We've lost something important, haven't we, in our rush to seem current?" Ilara nodded. "But we can reclaim it. That's what the play is about, remembering what matters." The morning of the winter assembly arrived cold and clear. Sunlight streamed through frost-covered windows as students filed into the auditorium. Ilara stood backstage, already dressed in the narrator's costume, a flowing garment embroidered with symbols that told stories within stories. Her grandmother's handiwork surrounded her, the restored costumes now worn by actors who had gradually come to appreciate their significance. Even Chloe, initially resistant, had admitted that the traditional designs photographed beautifully for her social media. 5 minutes, Miss Reynolds announced. "Is everyone ready?" Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had performed in her grandmother's kitchen, had sung the old songs during family gatherings, but never like this, never exposed before the very people who had mocked her for years. Julian appeared at her side, dressed for his role as the town elder. "Breathe," he reminded her. "Remember why you're doing this." She nodded, clutching a small pouch of lavender her grandmother had given her for courage. The familiar scent centered her, connecting her to generations of women who had faced their fears before her. The lights dimmed. The audience hushed. The music began, a haunting melody based on a folk song Ilara had hummed during one of their rehearsals. She stepped onto the stage. For the first few moments, her voice trembled, but as the story unfolded, her story, her grandmother's story, the story of a community that had forgotten its roots, something shifted. The trembling gave way to conviction. Her voice grew stronger, filling the space with words that had lived too long in silence. The audience leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the unfamiliar rhythms, the emotional honesty, the glimpse into traditions many had dismissed as irrelevant. When the final line was spoken, a moment of profound silence hung in the air. And then eruption. Applause thundered through the auditorium. Students rose to their feet, many with tears in their eyes. Ms. Reynolds rushed backstage, her face flushed with excitement. That was magnificent. The showcase directors are here, and they want to speak with the cast immediately. The cast gathered in the green room, still buzzing with adrenaline. 3 well-dressed adults joined them, representatives from the regional showcase. "We're impressed," the lead director said. "This excerpt has convinced us to feature Tides of Memory as the centerpiece of this year's showcase, but we'd like to meet the playwright. We have some questions about expanding certain themes." Ms. Reynolds looked uncomfortable. "The playwright prefers to remain anonymous." "That's not possible for a production of this scale," another director explained. "We need to work directly with the author on adaptations." Silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to Ms. Reynolds, who clearly didn't know how to proceed. It was Julian who broke the impasse. "The playwright is here, and should be given the choice to step forward or not." The weight of his words hung in the air. Ilara stood frozen, terror and possibility warring within her. This was the moment she had both dreaded and secretly longed for. The chance to claim her voice, to stand in the light not as the quiet girl, but as the creator she had always been. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes we create not for applause, but because the creating itself saves us. But perhaps sometimes the creating could save others too. "I wrote it," Ilara said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm the playwright." Disbelief rippled through the room. Chloe's mouth fell open. The directors exchanged skeptical glances. "You," one of them asked, "you wrote this intricate cultural narrative?" "Yes." Ilara straightened her shoulders. "The traditions in the play are my family's traditions. The dialect is my grandmother's dialect. The stories come from my heritage." Ms. Reynolds stepped forward. "I can vouch for Ilara's connection to the material, and after working with her these past weeks, I have no doubt of her abilities." One of the directors studied Ilara with new interest. "Well, Ms. Novak, it seems we have much to discuss. The showcase is in February. Are you prepared to expand this piece into a full production?" The question hung before her like an open door. Beyond it lay exposure, vulnerability, the risk of public failure, but also the possibility of being truly seen, truly heard, of giving voice not just to herself, but to all those who had been silenced before her. "Yes," said, "I am." The weeks that followed transformed Ilara's quiet life into a whirlwind of creativity and collaboration. The directors assigned her a mentor, a playwright from the city who specialized in cultural preservation through theater. Together, they expanded Tides of Memory into a full-length production, maintaining its emotional core while enriching its narrative structure. Word spread quickly through Miramar Academy that the quiet, weird girl had written the play that would represent their school at the prestigious showcase. Reactions ranged from disbelief to grudging respect to genuine enthusiasm. Suddenly, students who had never spoken to Ilara approached her in hallways, asking about the production, offering congratulations. The attention was overwhelming. There were days when Ilara retreated to the library, seeking the comfort of silence, the sanctuary of anonymity. Julian often found her there, creating a buffer between her and the curious crowds. "You don't have to hide anymore," he reminded her one afternoon as they worked on revisions. "They're finally seeing what I've seen all along." "What's that?" Genuinely curious. "That quiet doesn't mean empty." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "That some of the most powerful voices are the ones that make you lean in to listen." As January melted into February, preparations intensified. The entire cast and crew worked weekends, evenings, any available moment. Sophia joined the production team, officially recognized as the costume designer, a position she had been denied for years. The joy of creation returned to her fingers as she worked alongside her granddaughter, their shared heritage woven into every piece. Not everyone embraced the changes. Chloe struggled with her diminished role, her resentment occasionally surfacing in pointed comments and subtle sabotage. During one particularly tense rehearsal, she accidentally spilled coffee on the script revisions, setting work back by days. "She's jealous," Julian observed as they recreated the damaged pages. "She's always been the star. I never wanted to take that from Elara. This was never about being... Maybe it should be, though." Julian's voice held a challenge. "Maybe being seen is exactly what both you and this..." The night before the showcase, the cast and crew gathered for a final rehearsal. The auditorium hummed with nervous energy as they ran through transitions, fine-tuned lighting cues, adjusted sound levels. Everything had to be perfect. During a short break, Elara slipped away to the costume room, now cleaned, organized, and honored as a valuable resource rather than a dusty storage closet. She stood among the racks of garments, each one telling its own story, each one a testament to the hands that had created it. Sophia found her there, contemplating the sea spirit costume that had started this journey. "Are you ready, Minha querida?" she asked gently. "I don't know," Elara admitted. "What if they don't understand? What if they laugh?" "Then they laugh." Sophia shrugged, the gesture elegant despite her age. But the work remains true, and truth eventually finds its... The showcase was held in the Grand Theatre at the County Arts Center, a venue Elara had visited once on a school field trip, never imagining her words would one day fill its space. Backstage was organized chaos, costumes being adjusted, makeup applied, last-minute script changes communicated in urgent whispers. Elara wore a simple dress embroidered with her family's traditional patterns. Sophia's design, her hands work. Her dark hair was braided with thin silver threads that caught the light when she moved. In her pocket, she carried her worn notebook, a talisman of the journey that had brought her here. The program had been printed days ago, distributed to all attendees. On the cover, in elegant typography, was the title Tides of Memory by Elara Novak. Seeing her name in print had been surreal, terrifying, and exhilarating in equal measure. There was no hiding now, no anonymity to shield her if the audience rejected her voice. 5 minutes before curtain, panic. "I can't do... What if I freeze?" Julian took her hands in his. "Then I'll be there. We all will. But you won't freeze, Elara. This is your story, the one you've been waiting to tell your whole life." "Places, everyone! Curtain in 2 minutes." Elara closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of dust and wood and possibility. When she opened them again, determination had replaced fear. This was her moment, not just to be seen, but to ensure that all the silenced voices she represented would finally be heard. The curtain rose. The lights shifted from darkness to the soft amber glow of a coastal sunset, and Elara stepped forward to speak the opening lines she had written in the safety of her bedroom, never imagining they would echo through a theatre filled with strangers. The sea doesn't forget what the shore tries to bury. Every tide brings back what was lost. The play unfolded like a living tapestry. The costumes incorporated Sophia's embroidery patterns, each stitch telling a story within the story. The dialogue blended local dialects with poetic imagery, honoring the oral traditions that had shaped Elara's understanding of narrative. The lighting transformed the stage from stormy seas to quiet. Kitchens where generations gathered to preserve their heritage. From her position at the edge of the stage, Elara could see the audience leaning forward in their seats, captivated by a world most had never experienced. A world of quiet strength, of traditions passed from hand to hand, of beauty found in the overlooked corners of everyday life. When the final scene concluded, a reconciliation between past and present, tradition and innovation, the theatre fell silent for one breathless moment. Then the applause began. It started as a ripple, then swelled into a wave that filled the space with its force. The audience rose to their feet, their faces shining with tears and wonder. "Playwright!" someone called from the crowd. "We want the playwright!" The cast turned toward Elara, smiling encouragement. Julian extended his... "They're calling for you," he said softly. "This is yours." Trembling, she stepped forward into the center of the... The applause intensified, washing over her like the tides she had written about, powerful, cleansing, transformative. In that moment, standing in the spotlight that had once exposed every crack in her confidence, Elara felt something shift within her. The applause wasn't just for her words, it was for all the silent creators who had come before her, all those whose voices had been dismissed as too quiet, too different, too traditional, in a world that valued only the new and the loud. As she took her bow, she caught sight of her grandmother in the front row, tears streaming down her weathered face. Sophia's hands were raised in applause. those beautiful, skilled hands that had taught Ilara that creation was its own reward, that beauty mattered even when unrecognized. The showcase judges awarded Tides of Memory the highest honors of the evening. Critics from regional papers wrote glowing reviews, praising its authenticity, its emotional resonance, its skillful blending of cultural heritage with contemporary themes. Theatre companies from neighboring counties expressed interest in staging their own productions. But the most meaningful recognition came in smaller moments. A group of young girls from Ilara's cultural background approached her after the performance, their eyes wide with discovery. "We didn't know our stories could sound like this on stage," one said. "We didn't know people would listen." The following month, Ilara returned to Miramar Academy. She wore the same denim jacket, carried the same worn backpack, walked the same familiar halls. But everything had changed. Students who had ignored her for years now nodded in greeting. Teachers who had overlooked her quiet contributions now sought her opinions. Chloe approached her at lunch, her expression unreadable. "I underestimated you," she said simply. "The costumes they were beautiful. My mom says your grandmother was famous for her designs back in the day." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. Ilara accepted it with grace. "Thank you for bringing attention to that costume. Without that, none of this might have happened." Transformation rippled outward from the showcase success. The popular girl, inspired by the handmade costumes that had received such acclaim, applied to study traditional fashion design, discovering a genuine passion beneath her previous superficiality. The school started a new storytelling initiative named after Sophia, bringing elders from various cultural backgrounds to share their narratives with students. And Julian had been transformed as well. The boy known for his cutting wit had revealed himself to be someone capable of deep loyalty, of seeing value where others saw only oddity. His cynicism had given way to something more vulnerable, more authentic. One evening in early spring, they sat together on the cliffs overlooking the sea. The air smelled of salt and new growth. Below them, waves crashed against rocks in rhythmic percussion. "I found this small package in the theater arc. I thought you should have it." Ilara unwrapped the bundle carefully. Inside was a faded photograph, a young Sophia standing center stage, receiving applause for a production she had designed decades earlier. The joy on her face was luminous, unguarded. "She looked like you," Julian observed. "That night at the showcase, that exact same expression." Ilara traced the image with gentle fingers. "I never knew this existed." "There's more," Julian continued. "The drama department wants to revive some of the traditional productions from the archives, with your grandmother consulting, and they want you to write an original play for next fall." The possibility unfurled before her, a future where her voice continued to grow stronger, where the traditions she valued found new audiences, where creation became not just a private salvation, but a public gift. "There's something else too," Julian said, his voice softer now. "I've been working on a short film script based on some of the stories you've told me about your family. I thought maybe we could develop it together." Ilara looked at him, really looked, seeing not the aloof, sarcastic boy she had feared for years, but someone who had recognized her value when she couldn't see it herself. Someone who had created space for her voice when others had tried to silence it. "I'd like that." As they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ilara thought about the journey that had brought her here. Her success hadn't been instant or easy. It had cost her the comfort of hiding, had required sleepless nights, public vulnerability, emotional exposure. She had lost her anonymity, but gained authenticity. She hadn't needed to become someone new. She had just needed the world to finally see who she already was. Summer arrived in Miramar Bay with a riot of wildflowers and warm breezes that carried the scent of sea salt and possibility. For Ilara, the months following the showcase had unfolded like a dream, sometimes exhilarating, sometimes overwhelming, always transformative. Tides of Memory had been published by a small press specializing in cultural preservation. 2 theater companies had staged productions, each interpreting her words through their unique lenses. A university had invited her to speak about the integration of traditional narratives into contemporary theater. Her quiet life had become startlingly public. There were days when the attention felt like another kind of spotlight, exposing, demanding, exhausting. On those days, she retreated to the Blue House on the Eastern Hill, seeking comfort in Sophia's kitchen, in the familiar rhythms of kneading dough and brewing tea. "Fame is like salt water," her grandmother observed one such afternoon. "A little quenches thirst. Too much creates it." Ilara nodded, watching sunlight filter through lace curtains to create patterns on the worn wooden table. I don't know how to balance it all. School, writing, the attention. Balance is not about standing still, Sophia wrote. It's about knowing when to move and when to rest. This wisdom guided Ilara as summer deepened. She learned to set boundaries, to protect her creative space, to distinguish between opportunities that nourished her voice and those that merely exploited it. She turned down interviews that focused on her age or appearance rather than her work. She declined invitations that would have taken her too far from home, from the community that grounded her. Instead, she invested in deeper connections within Miramar Bay. She volunteered at the community center, teaching children from diverse backgrounds to write their own stories. She organized an exhibition of Sophia's costume designs at the local museum, highlighting the artistry that had been overlooked for too long. And she wrote, early mornings on the cliff overlooking the sea, late nights at her bedroom desk, stolen moments between classes when inspiration struck. Her worn notebook gave way to a new one, its pages filling with observations, character sketches, dialogue fragments. The words came more easily now, flowing from a place of growing confidence. Julian remained a constant presence, his friendship evolving into something more complex as they navigated their changing roles. The boy who had once intimidated her with his sharp remarks now challenged her with thoughtful questions, pushing her to dig deeper into her narratives, to examine her own assumptions. They worked on his film script throughout June and July, meeting in the gazebo behind the library or on the wide porch of the Blue House. The project blended his contemporary visual sensibility with her traditional storytelling, creating something neither could have developed alone. It's about seeing, Julian explained as they refined the screenplay. How we look at others, how we want to be seen, how we hide from being truly visible. And about hearing, Ilara added. The voices we amplify versus the ones we silence, including our own. Their creative partnership attracted attention from others. Students who had previously existed in separate social spheres began to approach them with ideas, seeking collaboration. Slowly, barriers dissolved. The rigid hierarchies that had defined Miramar Academy for generations began to shift, allowing new connections to form across previously impermeable boundaries. Not everyone welcomed these. There were parents who complained about the emphasis on foreign traditions in school production. There were community members who questioned the value of excavating old stories when the town was trying to attract new development. There were peers who resented the dissolution of familiar social structures. One morning in late July, Ilara arrived at the community center to find someone had spray painted "Go back where you belong" across the poster advertising her writing work. The sight stopped her cold, the words striking with physical force. "Don't let them see you react," a voice said. It was Ms. Reynolds carrying a box of art supplies. "That's what they want, but this is where I belong," Ilara said. "My family has been here for 4 generations." Ms. Reynolds set down her box and studied the graffiti. Some people fear what they don't understand, and some fear what they understand all too well. That change is inevitable, that no one group gets to define culture forever. Together, they cleaned the paint off as best they could. Ilara led her workshop with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, helping children shape stories about belonging, about home, about finding voice in hostile spaces. That evening, she sat with Sophia on their porch swing, watching fireflies rise from the tall grass like earthbound stars. "Maybe I should stop," describing the vandalism. "Go back to being invisible." Sophia's response was immediate and firm. "Never dim your light because others prefer darkness. But it's hurting people." "No, child, it's challenging them. There's a difference." Sophia rocked the swing gently with one foot. Change always meets resistance. The question is whether the change matters enough to persist. The question lingered with Ilara as August arrived, bringing with it preparation for her final year at Miramar Academy. The school had changed over the summer, physically with the renovation of the auditorium and expansion of the arts program, but also culturally. Students returned to find new opportunities for expression, new validation for diverse voices. Ilara and Julian's film project had evolved into a school-wide initiative, with students from different backgrounds contributing stories that reflected their unique experiences of the coastal town they all called home. Technical students handled filming and editing. Art students designed visual elements. Music students composed original scores. "It's becoming something bigger than us," Julian observed as they reviewed footage in the newly equipped media lab. "Something that belongs to everyone." Ilara nodded, watching clips of elderly residents sharing memories, of fishermen describing changes in the bay, of children playing games passed down through generations. That's what stories should do, connect us to something larger than ourselves. As the new school year approached, Elara faced a new challenge. Her growing recognition had attracted attention from universities across the country. Scholarship offers arrived in the mail, each presenting opportunities she had never imagined possible. Elite drama programs wanted her cultural perspective. Creative writing departments praised her authentic voice. The possibilities were both thrilling and terrifying. To leave Miramar Bay meant leaving the source of her inspiration, the community that had shaped her narratives. Yet to stay meant potentially limiting her growth, her exposure to new influences and technique. "What would you do?" she asked Julian one evening as they walked along the marina, watching boats bob gently in their slips. Summer was fading, the air holding the first hints of autumn crispness. He considered the question seriously, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. "I'd go," he said finally. "Not to escape this place, but to bring back new perspectives, to see our stories through different lenses." "But what if I lose my voice? What if I start sounding like everyone?" Julian stopped walking and turned to face her. "Elara, your voice isn't something external that can be taken away. It's built from everything you are, your family, your traditions, your experiences, including the hard ones." He gestured toward the town spreading behind them. "This place will always be part of you, no matter where you go." The wisdom of his words resonated with her. For so long, she had defined herself by her silence, by her invisibility. Then, she had defined herself by her newfound voice, by the recognition her work had received. But perhaps the truth was more complex. Perhaps she was neither the silent girl nor the celebrated playwright, but something richer, more nuanced, still evolving. As summer drew to a close, Elara made her decision. She would apply to universities that valued diverse narratives that could help her develop her craft while respecting her cultural foundations. But she would also create something lasting for Miramar Bay before she left, a project that would ensure the voices she had helped uncover would continue to be heard. With Julian's help, she established the Coastal Voices Archive, a digital collection of oral histories, traditional music, handcraft techniques, and culinary practices from the many cultures that had shaped their community. Students were trained to conduct interviews, to document traditions, to preserve stories that might otherwise be lost. Sophia became the project's first subject, sharing not just her costume designs, but the meanings behind them, the symbolism woven into each pattern, the cultural references embedded in each color choice. Her interview, conducted by Elara herself, became a template for others, demonstrating how to approach cultural documentation with respect and depth. The archive launched in September with a community celebration that transformed the town square. Food stalls offered traditional dishes from the various cultures represented. Artisans demonstrated techniques that had been passed down through generations. Musicians played instruments many younger residents had never seen before. Standing in the midst of this vibrant exchange, watching neighbors share aspects of themselves previously kept private, Elara felt a sense of completion. She had not only found her own voice, she had created space for others to find theirs. Chloe approached her near the Bulgarian pastry stand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "This is actually pretty amazing," she admitted, gesturing to the diverse gathering. "I never knew half these traditions existed right here in our town." "Most people didn't," Elara replied. "We never asked." Chloe nodded, considering this. "My application essay was about your project, about how it changed my perspective on what matters in design." She hesitated, then added, "The fashion program at Central accepted me. I'm going to focus on traditional techniques adapted for contemporary wear." It wasn't quite friendship, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that they had both been transformed by the events of the past year, that they had found value in unexpected places. As autumn painted the coastal landscape in rich reds and golds, Elara continued to write, to teach, to document. Her final year at Miramar Academy unfolded with a new sense of purpose. The quiet girl who had once hidden behind her hair now led workshops, directed productions, mentored younger students, finding their own. Julian remained her closest collaborator, their partnership deepening as they completed their film and submitted it to youth festivals across the country. Their creative connection had evolved into something more personal as well. Tentative at first, then increasingly confident. Their first kiss, shared on the cliffs as winter rain began to fall, felt like the natural progression of a story they had been writing together all along. "We'll make it work," he promised, as they discussed their likely separation the following year. She to a university on the East Coast, he to a film program in California. Distance doesn't have to mean disconnection. No, not when the connection matters enough. In late spring, as graduation approached, Elara received a letter she had not expected. The regional theater that had hosted the showcase was establishing a new program focused on preserving cultural narratives through performance. They wanted her to serve as a youth advisor, to help shape the initiative from its inception. It would mean staying closer to home as they prepared dinner together. The familiar rhythm of their movements, a dance developed over years of shared meal, taking classes locally, traveling to the theater twice a month. "And is that what you want?" her grandmother, her hands continuing their work as her eyes studied Elara's. I think it might, Elara, at least for there will be time for leaving later when this program is established." Sophia nodded, understanding the choice her granddaughter was making. Not a retreat from opportunity, but a deliberate investment in the community that had shaped her. The right path isn't always the one that leads furthest from home. Graduation day dawned clear and warm. Elara stood among her classmates in the school garden, the sea visible beyond the cliffs, the future stretching before them all like an uncharted voyage. As class valedictorian, an honor that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier, she was expected to address the gathered families and faculty. She approached the podium slowly, taking in the faces turned toward her, expectant, supportive, curious. In the front row sat Sophia, dressed in her finest embroidered jacket, pride illuminating her weathered features. Beside her sat Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Chen, and other teachers who had helped Elara find her voice. Julian watched from among the graduates, his eyes never leaving her face. "A year ago," Elara began, her voice clear and steady, "I stood on a stage not far from here, trembling with fear as laughter echoed around me. I believed then that silence was safety, that visibility meant vulnerability." She paused, looking out over the gathered community. The same people who had once witnessed her humiliation, now listening with genuine interest. "What I've learned since then is that our voices matter precisely because they are uniquely ours. That traditions survive not by remaining static, but by being continually renewed through fresh interpretation. That sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is simply to listen, truly listen, to stories different from our own." The audience nodded, many with tears in their eyes. They had witnessed her transformation, had been part of the change she had catalyzed within their community. As we leave this place, we carry with us not just what we've learned from books, but what we've learned from each other. The courage to speak when silence would be easier. The wisdom to listen when understanding seems impossible. The patience to build bridges between worlds that once seemed separate. She looked directly at her grandmother, drawing strength from Sophia's steady gaze. "My nonna often tells me that forgetting is easier than remembering, but what is easy is rarely what matters. Today, I would add, being heard is harder than remaining silent, but that too is what matters." As she concluded her speech, the applause that rose around her felt different from the ovation at the showcase. This wasn't appreciation for a performance, it was acknowledgement of a shared journey, recognition that her individual growth had contributed to collective transformation. In the weeks following graduation, Elara prepared for her new role with the regional theatre. She organized her notes, developed workshop outlines, scheduled meetings with community elders who might contribute to the program. Each task brought a sense of purpose, of continuation rather than conclusion. On her last evening before beginning this new chapter, she returned to the auditorium where her journey had begun. The space was empty, the stage bare except for a ghost light casting long shadows. She stood center stage, remembering the girl who had trembled under the spotlight, who had believed her voice didn't matter. So much had changed, yet something essential remained constant. Her connection to its stories, to the traditions that had shaped her understanding of the world. She had found ways to honor those while making them accessible to new audiences, to bridge the gap between preservation and innovation. As she turned to leave, she noticed Julian leaning against the back wall, watching her with a soft smile. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, joining her on stage. "Full circle." "Not a circle," she corrected gently. "A spiral. We return to similar places, but always at a different level." He nodded, understanding. "Ready for what's next?" Elara looked around the auditorium, seeing not just the empty seats, but the ghosts of all who had occupied them, those who had laughed, those who had listened, those who had been transformed. She saw, too, the promise of future audiences, future voices, future stories waiting to be told. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm ready." Outside, the coastal wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers, of memory and possibility. The sun was setting over Miramar Bay, painting the world in golden light. In the distance, waves crashed against the shore, constant, rhythmic, eternal, like stories, like voices, like the courage it takes to stand in the spotlight, trembling but determined, and finally speak. In every community, there are voices waiting to be heard, traditions being forgotten, stories fading with each passing generation. Listen for them. Create space for them. Because sometimes the quietest voice carries the most powerful truth, if only we have the courage to hear it.